Great, thanks. Just a very quick intro of who we are, who I am. Electric Corby, and then if you press just one more time now, and again, changing to Electric Places, there we go. We set up a community interest company back in 2012, so in fact May 17th, 10 years ago. Really just picking up on the need. There was a massive amount of growth going on in and around Corby, but across the whole area, and how can we make that sustainable in the long term? So we set up, with the support of the local authority at the time, a community interest company really about supporting that sustainable prosperity now across North Northamptonshire and beyond, in fact, but particularly around North Northamptonshire, initially around Corby, and really trying to establish the area as a leader in finding out what actions we could take, what the solutions might be for sustainable growth. So next slide. And so over that 10 years, we've been doing a whole host of projects, lots of them research and development projects, lots of them doing actions on the ground just to see what could be achieved. This is all tiny, and it's a long way away, so I'm happy to share the slides afterwards, but really that's just a snapshot of some of the things we've been doing. The very first thing we did in 2012, 2013 was charge points across Corby. So, and we were I was about to say laughed at. We were certainly questioned at the time of why are you putting a load of charge points out, because there are no cars that need them, and it's that classic chicken and the egg. So we had the opportunity through some funding that we identified to do that. So that was the very first thing we did, and then we've done a whole host of projects that I'll touch on a few of them just as examples in a minute, around primarily energy, transport and housing, or buildings more broadly, but housing particularly. How can we achieve sustainable growth? Next slide, thank you. This one again, sorry, it's quite small, the writing, but just to give you a sense of proportion, this is about greenhouse gas and essentially CO2 outputs, and where does it come from, and therefore where do we need to really focus to make a difference. The big segments are transport, 27%, energy, 21%, and then business and residential, another 32% between them. And everything else is really important, but relatively small in comparison to those big things. Which is why we took a particular focus around transport, energy, and then we call it houses and buildings, because in fact, 40% of our carbon emissions in the UK are from how we build, live in, move to and from our homes and buildings. So that captures a great deal of the other activity that's causing the challenge. Yeah, next slide. So that's really just confirming why we're going energy, transport and housing. So FleXunity is just a project that's coming to an end at the moment that we've been doing for the last few years. It's really about how do we create smart grids. What does that mean? That means how can we get renewable energy generation onto the network and generating our energy as quickly as possible. Which you might think is pretty straightforward, let's just build loads of solar farms or put loads of solar on our roofs, but actually it's really challenging to get that to the right places without breaking the grid. And that's really a project that's looking at how that's achieved and how businesses, residents and others can engage with that. So I'm happy to share them. You touched briefly there on mobility and the importance of the alternative options to the more traditional means of just driving everywhere, or just relying on a bus service that's pretty stretched and over the last number of years been shrinking. That's hopefully going to reverse, but this is a study looking at how you have an interaction between lots of different forms of mobility and how you make that really easy for people to do. You know, making it easier for people to get a bus when they need it, but also, you know, if they haven't got a car, how can they access one at low cost that's the right sort of car? So the cost of being able to buy an electric car is prohibitive for a lot of people at the moment. Can they have just temporary access to one when they need it for an hour, and get to where they need to get to and know that they can get back when it's made available to them? So that's what mobility hubs are about trying to achieve. And as Harry mentioned, that's being looked at certainly at the council level, and there are a number of studies going on, and we're involved in trying to support some of those in a project that I'll mention again in a minute. I'm rattling on, sorry, because I'm conscious you want to have a conversation, not just me tell you about things. So this was another project in the centre of Corby, which was how do we build the right sort of houses. So these were essentially energy positive houses. They had really good fabric, so they were built really well. Essentially, one of the biggest problems we have is we built our houses really badly for about 50 years. And they're not well insulated, they're not airtight, they're poorly heated, and we need to do something about that, and that is starting to change. This was a project to sort of give an example of what could be achieved if we did that. So these homes have solar panels for electricity and heating. They have an energy store in the ground which heats up during the summer and then is there to draw on during the winter through a heat pump. Shows what's possible, and they sold at the same price as normal houses in the area, so they weren't sold at a premium. We managed to do those at a cost that people could still afford, hopefully. Next slide. A couple of big projects, some of which is delivered, some of which is still being thought about. How do we actually generate the energy, deal more cleverly with the resources that we already have in the area? So particularly be familiar with not far away Chelveston Energy Park, wind turbines, not always very popular but extremely effective, a large amount of solar. They also deal with all of the wood waste in the county, all of the food waste in East Northamptonshire, and they are now looking at how they turn that energy into hydrogen, so that hydrogen can then go into the energy network or into transport and logistics. So they're really national, if not globally leading project right on your doorstep. So there is stuff happening locally. The other picture is of Kettering Energy Park, which is still not quite reached all of its full potential, but is certainly helping to contribute to renewable energy. Next slide. Another one right on your doorstep as well. In fact, these are based out of Chelveston. So I couldn't quite believe when I read about this one how much carpet waste we produce, but huge. 500,000 tonnes of carpet waste every year, and that just goes into landfill mostly or gets burnt. And so this is a local company, been supported by some central government funding as well, that's looking at how that how that's recycled essentially, effectively utilising the renewable energy that Chelveston Park is producing. So that recycling process is supported by renewable energy in the first place. Next slide. So there's lots of projects going on, lots of businesses doing interesting things. There's many more that can be encouraged to do more. I'll just pick a random example. In Corby, there's one of the largest producers of wet wipes, which are a massive challenge in terms of the fact that they're not reusable generally. They clog up the drains. They have all sorts of. They've really taken a hard look at how they can shift what they're producing, how they're producing it, what its life cycle is. So there's lots of good things going on. NN to NZ, North Northamptonshire to net zero. So last year, government put a call out for projects under a banner called Community Renewal Fund, and we put a bid in, really keen to try and pull together I think most people have mentioned today a route map, action plan, what can we do, what's happening and what can we do to get involved in that. So North Northampton Net Zero is it's a relatively short project through till the end of June this year as a starter, but it's about trying to map and identify and find all of those actions that are already happening, but also map and gather all those that could be happening, the things that we could be doing as individuals, as businesses, as local authorities, all those things, and how we bring them together, start to see which ones are most feasible, see which ones can have the most impact in the next 2 years, in the next 5, and over the next 30 years, given that we've got a 10-year or less than that, 8 years essentially, to really accelerate this change. So this project is about doing that. If you move on to the next slide. So really, as I said, it's about identifying those low carbon projects and initiatives, helping them and assessing them. How feasible are they? Helping them get to focus in on what they can be doing more effectively, perhaps. Start to see how they might strategically align with what else is going on. So obviously the authority has a very clear or an emerging vision of how it's going to take its work forward and how that impacts on the local community as well. But as we've identified, businesses need to do more, can do more, are interested and keen to do more. how can we map that and strategically align those to really be effective so they're not pulling against each other or duplicating, and we make the best of the effort that we've got to make very quickly. And then really also importantly, helping those projects be ready to get the next round of funding that may come along, whether that's public sector funding from government or private sector funding, such as the carpet recycling company. That's got a little bit of money from government, but it's got a lot more from the private sector that's now supporting it because it sees a business advantage in doing it, and will put its investment in. So how can we do all of that? And then, I'd say our main focus, in truth, is around sort of low carbon transport, buildings and energy. That's not to exclude lots of the green initiatives, environmental initiatives that can go on. They'll have an impact, and we're keen to hear about those as well. Our major focus, given, as I said on that disc earlier, where we can have and where we need to have the biggest short-term impact, is around some of those key things: transport, energy, and buildings. And obviously, I mean, we've talked a lot about how this is all a tragedy and how depressing it can feel when we're faced with all these challenges and not being able to see what we can do about it. There are some absolute positive upsides, and I think we're keen to identify particularly how it can help the economic growth and prosperity of the area by ensuring people can tap into the jobs that are going to emerge from this change and transition to make it more just, but also talk about the things that this can mean: a healthier, happier place that we live in. It's cleaner, more enjoyable. These are all positives that this change can do if we can make that transition as just as possible. So I think that's the last slide coming up, I think. Oh no, it's not. You're not going to read all this, but we talked about what we could do. I asked a bunch of what ifs. And so part of what we're doing in this project is we're doing some baseline information. Okay, what does net zero actually look like? That's the first thing. Where are we now, and where do we need to get to in terms of the total quantity of change? And then we're doing some scenarios saying, well, what if this happened? What if that happened? What could we do? And these are things that are not necessarily going to happen. So what if every house was covered in solar? What if every car park was covered in solar? What if everybody turned vegetarian? What if no one drove to work? What if everybody walked into the town centre? These are things that are not going to happen in total, but they're things that we can all do individually to some degree, and they may have an impact. So what we're trying to do is map all of these different things that we could do and see where a sweet spot for North Northamptonshire might be. What's realistic for us to do in the next 8 years, and how can we start to encourage that to happen and get the funding for it? So next slide, I think, is nearly it. Oh yeah, this is a top 10 actually. So what are the top 10 things we can do as an individual? Top is live car free. So that'll save at an individual level 2 tons of carbon, pretty much. If you can't do that, then drive a battery electric, because that'll save nearly as much, 1.95 tons. Other things you can do is take 1 less flight every year. Renewable electricity, make sure you've switched across if you can. I mean, that's such a challenging thing at the moment, the whole energy scenario and pricing. But you know, if you can switch across to renewable energy, do that. Use public transport, that's nearly a ton. And going on down the list, so there's a bunch of things we can do. You can see the relative impact. I can't even read it, so you can't read it there. So here we go. Renewable-based heating, improved cooking equipment at the bottom there, heat pumps. Everybody talks about heat pumps. You know, it's about just less than half as effective as just not using the car as much, or the car at all. Whole bunch of things we can do. That is the last slide now, there we go. So we're doing this call for projects, and I say project sounds like a grand thing, it's ideas really. Yes, definitely, if people are aware of or keen to promote a project, then we want to know about it. There's a website that's literally just going live. If it's a bit clunky this weekend when you go and look at it, it was only launched yesterday and it'll be properly live on Monday. But if you just go to nn2nz, North Northampton Net Zero.co.uk, or alternatively, the shortcut is just email projects@nn2nz, and we just want to hear about them. We're in the middle of gathering all that evidence and data at the moment, and looking to see what the next round of actions and projects could be for the area. That was a gallop through, because I'm conscious of